An 8 trillion shift just happened in silence, and history says when this pattern reaches its final stage, Western markets don't wobble, they break. China has quietly executed a financial maneuver of staggering scale. $8 trillion have been repositioned, redirected, and restructured, not announced, not debated, not explained. To put that number in perspective, it exceeds the total economic output of Germany, rivals Japan, and outweighs the combined GDP of the entire African continent. And the truly unsettling part is not the size of the move, but its purpose. This is not routine portfolio management. It is not normal diversification. It is preparation. Preparation for an economic confrontation that history shows ends the same way every time. What makes this moment so dangerous is not theory or speculation. This exact sequence has unfolded before. Different centuries, different nations, different technologies, but the same structure, the same stages, and the same result. 3 times in modern history, a rising power followed this path while an established empire dismissed the warning signs as noise. Each time, the collision was unavoidable. Each time, the dominant system collapsed economically, not militarily, and each time, the majority didn't see it coming until it was too late. Over the past 2 years, China has systematically reorganized roughly $8 trillion worth of foreign assets, currency reserves, and trade relationships. The moves are quiet, technical, and easy to overlook if you believe global finance still operates on cooperation and trust. Many in the West assume this is simply China behaving pragmatically, adjusting to market conditions. That assumption is the first mistake, because when you view these actions through the lens of historical patterns rather than headlines, a very different picture emerges. There is a recurring 4-stage process that appears whenever a rising economic power challenges an established financial empire. It is not taught in standard economics courses, largely because it contradicts the comforting narrative that globalization prevents conflict. This pattern has nothing to do with ideology or morality. It is driven by incentives, leverage, and mathematics. And crucially, it always unfolds in the same order. The first stage is deep interdependence. 2 powers become tightly linked through trade, finance, and supply chains. Goods flow freely. Capital moves easily. Both sides grow wealthier. And experts declare that conflict is impossible because each depends on the other. Politicians celebrate partnership. Economists write papers about permanent stability. This stage feels safe. It never is. The second stage is uneven accumulation. One side begins to save, stockpile, and prepare, while the other consumes, borrows, and relaxes. Surpluses build on one side, deficits on the other. The imbalance grows quietly, hidden behind rising GDP and healthy markets. By the time it becomes visible, the leverage has already shifted. The third stage is strategic repositioning. The rising power recognizes it has accumulated enough advantage. Without making noise, it starts building alternatives, new trade routes, new payment systems, new reserve assets. Publicly, cooperation continues. Privately, separation is being engineered. This is the most dangerous stage because it feels calm. That is where we are now. The fourth and final stage is controlled demolition. Dependency, carefully cultivated over decades, is weaponized. Financial pressure replaces armies. Markets break not by accident, but by design. The established power finds itself trapped by its own debt, its own consumers, and its own assumptions. There is no effective response, only damage control. This pattern first played out on a global scale between Britain and Germany in the early 20th century. Britain entered the 1900s as the undisputed financial center of the world. Its currency anchored global trade, its banks financed empires, and its confidence was absolute. Germany, meanwhile, was industrializing at extraordinary speed. Trade between the two surged, reinforcing the belief that their economic bond made conflict unthinkable. Behind the scenes, Germany was doing something else entirely. It quietly reduced its exposure to British currency, accumulated massive gold reserves, and built alternative trade relationships across Europe and beyond. British elites dismissed these moves as irrelevant. They believed their dominance was permanent. When conflict finally erupted, the damage to Britain's financial system was immediate and devastating. The pound lost its supremacy, and within a generation, global financial leadership had shifted away for good. Decades later, the same structure appeared in the relationship between the United States and Japan. After World War II, America helped rebuild Japan, integrating it deeply into global trade. The arrangement seemed ideal. The U.S. gained inexpensive manufactured goods, while Japan gained access to capital and consumers. Prosperity soared on both sides, but Japan began accumulating enormous dollar reserves and converting them into strategic assets. It purchased iconic American properties and companies, not as trophies, but as leverage. When tensions surfaced, financial pressure, not military force, became the weapon. A sudden, coordinated liquidation of assets triggered market chaos that nearly broke the American financial system. The lesson was clear. Economic warfare could be faster, cleaner, and more effective than traditional conflict. More recently, Europe's relationship with Russia followed the same trajectory. Energy dependence deepened under the assumption that trade ensured peace. While European leaders spoke of cooperation, Russia accumulated reserves, reduced exposure to Western currencies, and built parallel financial infrastructure. When the confrontation arrived, energy flows became the weapon. The result was soaring inflation, industrial shutdowns, and long-term economic damage, inflicted without a single missile landing on European soil. China has studied all of this. The first stage of the China-US relationship unfolded between the 1990s and roughly 2010. Manufacturing migrated east. Supply chains were rebuilt around efficiency rather than resilience. China became both the world's factory and a major holder of Western debt. Profits rose, prices fell, and the relationship was framed as mutually beneficial and permanent. The second stage accelerated over the past decade. China accumulated trillions in reserves, expanded global infrastructure projects, and funded trade routes that bypassed traditional Western systems. New institutions emerged to offer alternatives to dollar-based financing. Digital settlement mechanisms were tested. Resource stockpiles grew to record levels. While the West debated quarterly earnings, China was building redundancy. Now we are firmly in stage 3. Over the last 24 months, China has been actively reducing exposure to U.S. debt, increasing gold holdings, expanding currency swap agreements, and scaling up independent payment systems. These are not experiments. They are operational systems designed to function under stress. Perhaps most telling, state-controlled entities have been instructed to withdraw from Western markets entirely within a defined timeline. That is not hedging. That is exit planning. History suggests what comes next. When stage 4 begins, it does not announce itself. It arrives through coordinated actions that strain multiple pressure points at once. Bond markets seize as large holders sell simultaneously. Interest rates spike. Central banks are forced into impossible choices between inflation and collapse. Supply chains fracture through regulatory delays and export restrictions rather than outright bans. Shortages appear, prices surge, and confidence evaporates. At the same time, an alternative is offered. A parallel system, already built, becomes the escape route for those willing to switch. Trade settles in new currencies. Payments bypass legacy networks. Countries facing crisis choose survival over loyalty. The transition accelerates not because it is ideological, but because it is practical. The most dangerous misconception is the belief that mutual dependence prevents this outcome. History shows the opposite. Interdependence creates leverage. Another comforting myth is that reserve currency status is permanent. It never has been. It endures only as long as trust, discipline, and restraint exist, and those conditions are eroding. The final illusion is that a rapid response can neutralize the damage. Supply chains cannot be rebuilt overnight. Manufacturing capacity cannot be conjured on demand. Financial systems cannot absorb shocks of this scale without long-lasting consequences. This is not fear-mongering, it is pattern recognition. The timeline is narrowing. The preparation is visible. The leverage is real. Whether the final trigger comes sooner or later, the direction is set. The question is not whether the system changes, but who is prepared when it does. History is clear on one point. Those who recognize the pattern early preserve options. Those who dismiss it lose them. The 8 trillion move is not the event itself, it is the positioning before the event. And once that positioning is complete, the final stage no longer requires permission, consensus, or warning. The collapse, when it comes, will feel sudden only to those who weren't paying attention.